Well, welcome back to the pit, my friends. That's right, we're here to talk about gross, horrible, and disgusting things. I am, as always, your host, May Leech. I enjoy leeches on or around my body. I enjoy a leech. A leech is good. Leeches are good for you. Yum, 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 have yourself a leech today. Last time we were on the channel, we talked about the top 10 most disturbing movies I've ever seen. I had seen some shit. I figured at that point that I should make the most honest, disturbing movies list just based on all the shit that I have actually read and seen. I was like, damn, I gotta actually talk about the ones that are really super hardcore and not the ones that are just normal people hardcore. Well, it turns out that I've got more to say. I wanted to talk about books, primarily because I wrote a fucked up book. Like, this is my fucked up book that I wrote. Would I say that this is as bad as anything on this list? Probably not even fucking close. But for the sake of argument, let's just say that I am a connoisseur, one who is knowledgeable about the fucked up book. I know a thing or two about a fucked up book. Because of this, I was like, well shit, I should talk about my top 10 most fucked up books that I've ever read, the most disturbing literature that I can think of that exists. I guess a few of these are gonna end up being personal picks, but to be honest with you, some of the things on here completely like not unseeable, like you cannot get away from the knowledge you learn, and that part about it is kind of the shitty thing. About a year ago, I became obsessed with this idea. The idea was that is there knowledge out there that if you learn it, will just make life just shitty for you forever? Is there a book out there you can read that will literally ruin your life? So I started Googling, is there a book out there that can literally ruin your life? And oh boy, did I find some great stuff! And while I will say it did not ruin my life, I am completely fine in every single regard, it did make me completely fucking insane. So now, I am completely fucking insane, and I read a lot of weird literature that's really edgy. So because of this, I have decided to make my top 10 most disturbing books of all time list, because it's goddamn about time. Just like I did with the movie video, I gotta do some like honorable mentions before we get started here, because there's a lot of books. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of books exist. It turns out many people have written books. Bitch, I've written a book. Everyone's done it. So because everyone's done it, that's a lot of stuff to sift through. That's a lot of things to go through and reading takes time and mental patience. And when you're an autistic person with ADHD like myself, you're going to find that reading can sometimes be difficult without proper medication. So might I recommend grabbing yourself some medication and beginning to read any of the books on this list. Just enjoy the insanity that will follow. Honestly, life is a lot more blissful when you know how fucked up it is. You just don't care anymore. And understand that these honorable mentions, some of them are kind of silly, but I wanted to just talk about them. The first one is Crank. So if you were 17 once upon a time, which maybe you were, maybe you weren't, some people fall from the fucking sky around here. Crank was a book that they kind of inundated you with when you were young to try and get you to not do crystal meth. Now, when you're me and you desperately want to do crystal meth, the book is not going to make you not do crystal meth, but it is going to be really funny. While this book ends up on a ton of like most disturbing book lists, this book is not that bad. It's just not that bad. I mean, maybe if you're like a teenager, it's bad, but it's not that bad. And also, there exists this book called Go Ask Alice by Anonymous, a book packaged to scare kids into not trying LSD. The same thing exists here. Crank is trying to get you to not do crystal meth. I think what we learned with the DARE movement is that when you walk in and you tell kids crystal meth exists, that it's really cool and you shouldn't do it, a lot of people are going to go do it. So the funny thing is a lot of people that read this book when I was in high school now have harrowing drug addictions. What happened, Ellen Hopkins? I guess it didn't work. I guess you just glorified the existence of crystal meth. I just reread the book like literally a month ago just to see if my memory served me correctly, and I do read a lot of books, so this just happened to be on my reading list, and I learned that not only is it really stale poetry, not only is it long-winded but also way too short, not only is it really secretly kinda right-wing and very like, drugs are bad, okay? It also is just like not that accurate and very stupid. So listen, don't do crystal meth, kids. I have personally lost some of my friends' lives to crystal meth, but don't do it because Ellen Hopkins said it in the worst imaginable way. But it is funny that people keep calling this a disturbing book when objectively, this is like war on drugs propaganda. Okay, the next title is Blood Meridian, which I believe is Cormac McCarthy. I'm really bad at names and dates, which is great when you're a historian. Okay, Blood Meridian is just really nihilistic. It's a Western. It's hard to even call it a Western because it's like what I would consider to be a high Western. It's not Louis L'Amour, or I think is how you pronounce that. It's not like trashy Western, but it's like deals with the realities of racism, and it deals with the realities of like life and death and torture and shit like that. Understand that it's a piece of classic literature, really well written, genuinely really pushes the envelope on the whole nihilism thing. So if you want to fuck around with some Western nihilism, might I recommend you go give Blood Meridian a shot, just because like it's great literature, and the last page still haunts an entire population of people. The next honorable mention is A Clockwork Orange. I feel like I had to mention it, but I mostly just because when I was in 11th grade, I read A Clockwork Orange. I had a teacher in high school take the book away from me and tell me I was not allowed to read it because it was disgusting and I wasn't allowed to have it, and it was not Christian to read things like this. Understand that I didn't go to a Christian school, and I was also in special ed. When this book was taken away from me, I didn't understand, and I quickly went out and bought a replacement copy and finished the book. You know, I still don't feel like I understood why that book was taken from me. I mean, I guess it was eye-opening literature, sure. Generational men thing and politics. It is about stuff. Anyway, don't take books away from kids. That's really fucked up. Kids should read. Okay, the next thing is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but honestly, like most of Hunter S. Thompson's stuff can end up in here, and I don't think that Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is the most extreme thing that Hunter S. Thompson ever wrote. Enough of some kind of grit in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas to call it worth reading, more so maybe than other Hunter S. Thompson stuff, because not only is he bold-faced about his ability to commit crimes, he also talks about it honestly. He genuinely tries to get us to understand him, and understanding him is not necessarily perfect. So we enjoy the scumbag shit, but I don't know how I feel about celebrating him as a person, because he was the first person to admit that he was not a great person. Naked Lunch. It's a classic, a really harrowing depiction of drug addiction, because it's like a complete fall into fantasy, and it's written in a way that's just shocking to read. Prose is weirdly stream of consciousness and weirdly honest, drift away from its own points with such a constant nature that you almost question like what even the points are, what is even being said, what am I supposed to get out of this other than perspective. And so I think more than anything, this is like a genuine perspective of someone who is drug addled. I know that being drug addled is like not a condition. In this sense, I would say that William S. Burroughs is being strung out in a way that no one else really honestly was writing about. Fear and Loathing, you know, is more about psychedelic use and how that affects the mind, and how the mind and post-70s capitalism kind of meld together in a horrifying way. This book is a lot more about the continued day-to-day use, complete fall into fantasy. I would say that it's probably one of the more important things I ever read in my life, but I would also say that it's difficult, not just on a content level, like the things they say and do in the book are difficult, but I mean the way it is written is very difficult. So understand going into it that it might be a challenge. A lot of these books are kind of challenging to read. A Clockwork Orange, if you've never seen the movie and you have no idea about the language, a lot of it is in Nadsat. So you have to learn Nadsat in order to even understand the book at all. Some copies of the book have a dictionary in the back so that you can just like swap to the back and see what the fuck they're talking about. But other editions do not have a dictionary. So you're just kind of fucked and good luck. So the next book is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. First off, American Psycho did not make it onto my most disturbing books list, but it did make it onto my mentions. So Bret Easton Ellis does have a book on my list. Not this one. American Psycho is good in that it is honest, but more honest about Bret Easton Ellis's perspective, because I do genuinely feel like in order for him to empathize to such a deep level with someone who is such a fucking scumbag, you gotta be at least a taste of a scumbag yourself. And if Bret Easton Ellis has been open about anything in his entire writing career, it's that he is totally a scumbag and loves scumbag shit. But it's worth mentioning that he hates the adaptation of American Psycho into a film because Mary Harron took this kind of critical eye to a lot of it, where Bret Easton Ellis didn't take this critical eye to it. I think that him not taking the critical eye actually makes it overall way more horrifying, in my opinion. There's a lot in there about empathizing with people that are shitty, very Catcher in the Rye in certain senses. Even if you can't understand the impulses that he's going through, you do understand where the cause and effect came from, where the emotions came from that led him to the place where he would begin to think about these things. And that level of genuinely empathizing with someone like that can be rather harrowing and can be problematic for you. So I would say that American Psycho is real good, but also tread lightly because the book goes way harder than the movie. Way harder than the movie, and it's also it's honest about it. It's completely okay with being exactly as shitty as it is. So Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark I put on here, but listen, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is primarily disturbing because of its artwork, which you've seen the artwork, everybody's seen the artwork, I've made a million videos about it. But I feel like if I didn't mention it, somebody would be like, have you not even seen the artwork for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? And it's like, yes, I have, but this is about literature. We're talking about the disturbing written word. We're talking about stringing words together and making them suck. I got a lot of shit that I could show you that's very scary. That is art. I would say that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a disturbing read if you're 7. It's disturbing for the pictures, and the stories themselves are kind of 50-50. Okay, the next thing I wrote down is Berserk as an honorable mention, just because A, Berserk is one of my favorite things I ever read. B, Berserk is absolutely fucked up and disturbing. And everybody talks about it. Everybody talks about how there's that one section in Berserk that's just completely inappropriately fucked up. I hear you, but I love it. I love it. I fucking love it. It was Shakespearean. I was like, fuck, this is great. But at the same time, while I was sucking up the wow, this is great, I will admit that I was on edge during I think it's volumes 12 and 13 as things got really fucking spicy. That really spicy period of the series is what people talk about when they talk about Berserk being disturbing. There's bullshit throughout that's really fucked up, but the thing that's really the most fucked up happens in volume 13. Insofar as when I went and bought the book once upon a time, they had a giant sticker over the cover of the book that said, "Warning, do not read this if you are under the age of 18. Had to hide it in the back. I had to ask for it. They brought it, and this is completely ridiculous because I don't think that it's as bad as that. Maybe it is, but the fact that they were hiding it from me is fascinating. And also, Miura died this year, which is terrible, or was the last year? I don't know. Open wound. I hate it. I hate that he is dead because Berserk was one of my favorite things. So pour one out for the homie. People die, but damn, that one really hurt. Next up is Uzumaki. I feel like once again, it's an obligatory mention because yeah, it's one of the most fucked up, disturbing things I've ever read. That's not untrue. You've seen this around. Uzumaki is genuinely really good. It's a really good series. I think that there are several moments in there where it feels like he's running completely out of steam and then finds a completely new avenue to explore. Maybe the most exciting but also fucked up thing about it is every time you think you've seen it all, he demonstrates a new way where you haven't seen it all, and he's gonna show you something way worse. And by the end of it, it's such a fucking nightmare that I think it even trumps an H.P. Lovecraft ending where you're just wow, very small, world very big, threat very big, me very small. Honestly, any Junji Ito could make it onto this list. I do have a Junji Ito later. I think you should probably read all of his stuff because all of it's very good. But if you're looking for ones that are the most disturbing, I'd probably run straight to Uzumaki first. Next is Mai-chan's Daily Life, which I already talked about on the movie one, but I figured I would also mention it here even briefly. There is a Mai-chan movie, which is the movie that I talk about in the top 10 most disturbing movies video. The Mai-chan series, manga series is way worse. It's the worst thing anyone did ever. It's real bad, y'all. Mai-chan constantly regenerates and almost kind of enjoys her own torture. She lives in a situation where she's constantly every day demeaned and then tortured and then taken apart, and then she grows back. But it's also like weirdly lesbian. If y'all didn't know this, I have a record label. I make my own music. I do have a record label. It's called Maybe Records, and the logo is from Mai-chan's Daily Life. The manga is really funny to me and not so funny to literally anyone. Okay, the last honorable mention before we actually get into the proper list, a series called Hino Horror. Hino Horrors are a book series that I actually have, but I don't want to bring out because I don't want to damage them. Hideshi Hino wrote manga for a long time before directing the Guinea Pig series, and also rising to prominence just throughout a lot of different mediums as being a real gross guy. Hino Horrors is genuinely some of the most miserable, gory manga I've ever read. I almost put Johnny the Homicidal Maniac on here just to be like, also there's that, you could read that. And if you don't know about Jonan Vasquez and Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, you should check that out. But I would say that Hino Horrors are basically Johnny the Homicidal Maniac way worse. There's like 18 or 19 of these. Good luck ever finding them, but there might be PDFs online. It is worth reading. I genuinely really enjoy these. I almost enjoy these way more than anything else Hideshi Hino ever did. It's just him working on a story level and him asking himself, what fucked up stories do I want to tell, instead of like, what fucked up gore effects can I achieve on camera? Him working a completely different part of his creative mind, and I do really like a lot of his stuff. Reading these really endeared me to him quite a bit. Okay, all right, and without further ado, these are, in my opinion, the 10 most disturbing books I've ever read. Probably, I'm gonna say they're the 10 most disturbing books of all time, because I believe that life is an illusion. It is a manifestation you make for yourself. So, in my world, these are the 10 most disturbing books of all time, even if they aren't actually the 10 most disturbing books literally ever written on an objective level. But I don't think anybody is pretending this is objective. I think y'all are just here to learn about 10 books that'll make you really shit your pants. So, without further ado, here are 10 books that are gonna make you shit your pants. Okay, so number 1, the reason why I made this video, and also something I've been trying to figure out how to talk about for a really long time, but the book is called Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright. One of the most important reading experiences I've ever had in my life, without a doubt, but at the same time, it is so viscerally and utterly repulsive that there is nothing good about it, and there is nothing good to tell another human about it whatsoever. This is one of those books that you read, enjoy, and then keep a secret that you enjoyed and never tell anyone. Written by Poppy C. Bright, who is a trans man, and the book is very, very gay. So when I say the book is very gay, I mean that in like 2 or 3 different senses. Way number 1, is the book about homosexual men? Yes, it is. Number 2, is it depicting a lot of homosexual behavior? Yes, it is. Number 3, does it come across like the writing of someone that has like really gay machinations? Mega yes. If we're talking about one thing that is capital G gay about Exquisite Corpse, it is the prose. Oh my god, it's so intense in how it is like that. There were 3 times when I was reading it that I put it down and said, this is just terrible. Like, and not just terrible like I thought that it was gross, but just terrible in that I thought that it was so almost offensively gay that I had to set it down and be like, Jesus Christ, good Lord, my fucking God. And that is entirely my reaction to that level of the book. It being gay is, in my opinion, one of the more appealing things about it. The less appealing things about it, literally a book about 4 serial killers, 1, the perfect victim ever. So think Dead by Daylight, but instead of 4v1 survivors versus killers, 4v1 killers versus survivor. And then of course the survivor is just the worst at surviving and ends up in a situation where all of these killers get to have a fun, wonderful, beautiful, completely poetic orgy of murder and torture and violence. This is written with such detail. There are several points in this very short book where you will want to take it and throw it out of the window of a moving car. Genuinely, I think Exquisite Corpse is probably the most offensive book I've ever read. Per capita, per word, per page, the amount of times I said, ugh, fuck off, per page was like 4. I'm not even kidding. Like, there's so much shit in this where I'm just like, oh my god. if they adapted this to a movie, no one would be able to see it. It would be so fucking awful. Highly recommend Exquisite Corpse. It is my favorite disturbing book because it's the one that pushes things so fucking far that you can't even tell your friends you like it. And don't we love that? Isn't that great? I love that. Okay, so the next book is Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. This is kind of a meme because of the story Guts, which is the first story in Haunted. If you don't know anything about Chuck Palahniuk, he wrote Fight Club, he wrote a bunch of other shit. He's very known for countercultural fiction. He has some questionable views in a lot of his books. The man writes really fucked up books. And the reason people like him is because he writes really fucked up books. He wrote one of my favorite books of all time, which I don't even know if I'm allowed to like. I don't even know how I feel about it. I've read it many times, but yeah, still have no idea how to feel about it. But it's called Invisible Monsters, and the reason I say it was my favorite is it had a shock appeal. I kept reading it. I had to keep knowing. Haunted is in my opinion, lesser than Invisible Monsters. I think that it's a decent book. Primarily, I think the reason that people are disturbed by it is because there are several stories in the book that will genuinely really bother you on any level, but the reason that everybody is mostly bothered by it is about the story Guts. It is a story that famously makes a lot of people pass out when they read it, which is basically a bunch of marketing bullshit, but also the story is really bothersome. The story follows a boy who is doing a masturbate on the bottom of a pool, and then when he goes to surface after he has ejaculated, he finds that he cannot surface because his organs have come out of his ass and have attached themselves to the bottom of the pool on the pool filter. He's trapped and is going to drown under the pool water unless he chews through his own intestines. I mean, doesn't that just sound like the most lovely story you've ever heard ever? There's also a minor story in that story about someone who's doing sounding, and if you don't know what sounding is taking a little rod and putting it into one's penis, which is very strange in my opinion. I don't know why they do this. They lose the thing in their penis, and then it's just very bad news. So that is fucking... If you're wondering what the straight dudes are up to, Haunted. Okay, so the next book is called Tales of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe, and this is by Thomas Ligotti. There are two Thomas Ligotti books on my top 10 most disturbing, and not a lot of people talk about this, but this book's really fucked up. It's a short story compilation written genuinely by a horror genius. It also is scary on this level where you're mostly feeling this inevitability of your loss of control. Thomas Ligotti has a thing for puppet shit like that, a whole lot about the loss of autonomy, loss of control, thinking you have control, doing things to maintain control, but then realizing that that makes you lose control and life falls apart. And a lot of those ideas genuinely so challenging that they will linger and disturb you for a very long time. The first story in Tales of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe is almost a meme. It's called The Frolic, and it's basically about a guy that's working with a serial killer at a fucking jail, and he decides he's gonna stop working for him because the guy implies that he knows where he lives and that he's gonna come to his house, and then the guy breaks out of jail and comes to his house and does horrible things to his child. Awful story, but the point is it's about a parent trying to maintain control, trying to maintain a healthy, happy life within society and not cause any problems, do what's right, and in doing what's right, accidentally loses one's autonomy into the system, and then the system totally fucking destroys their life. Fascinating shit. Some of my favorite literature that's ever been written is in Tales of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe. You have got to go read this right now. Fourth book, which is not a book that you need to read whatsoever. Matter of fact, I would almost suggest you don't, but it is also by Thomas Ligotti. Very ironic. But the book is called The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. So I returned to the thing I said at the beginning of the video, which was that I had Googled what books can you read that will genuinely sour your ideas of life so much with genuine knowledge that you will no longer see see the purpose of life. Conspiracy Against the Human Race is the book to do it. If there was a book that would take away your ability to see the good in life, it would be Conspiracy Against the Human Race. And the funny thing about it is, it's written by Thomas Ligotti, and he clearly is making arguments throughout the book about how he doesn't believe a lot of the arguments that he is making, but he's making the arguments because people are positing the arguments. And the arguments are about whether or not human consciousness is a curse that is put on beings. Life would be better if we were never given consciousness, and that consciousness was basically an accident of natural selection. It protects us from some things, but it more than anything has come around to begin to harm us just as a thing that exists because we can't handle the anxiety of our own existence. So the conspiracy against the human race is to say, because we are immediately born with consciousness, self-awareness, and the knowledge that death is possible, we will never be able to get away from our fears and anxieties. And so life is a curse of fear and anxiety that is given to lifeless things. This is the argument that Thomas Ligotti makes very eloquently while genuinely saying he doesn't agree with it. He will constantly propose almost comical counter arguments to how this is super edgy and negative and this is not the best way to look at life. At the end of the day, I do think he makes such a compelling case for that side of experience that it's really hard to break oneself out entirely from that mentality. And I will say that there are ideas in Conspiracy Against the Human Race that, while I don't think necessarily reflect reality entirely, they will never leave my mind. Something I learned, I guess, from reading it was that I found this more freeing than damning. It didn't make me despair about life. It made me free from a lot of my expectations that it had to be some huge thing that was like more. It doesn't. It can just be consciousness is kind of a nightmare. And yeah, we are kind of scared. Like, what are you going to do with your time to get away from that fear is a fairly valid question to ask in our world. So now moving on to literally probably one of the worst, if not the worst book I ever read, which is called Cows by Matthew Stokow. I don't know if this person is an indie author. I don't know what the deal is. All I know is while the prose of this book was what I'm going to call tolerable, I'm going to say that the content of this book was so upsetting that it bordered on camp. I don't know if this is what Matthew Stokow wants to feel, but it is my 5th most disturbing book I've ever read. It is about people who work in a slaughterhouse, kill cows all day long, and the first kill is like really kind of shocking, but then over time they start to get used to it, and then they start to kind of develop a nihilistic sense of humor about it, and then they start to just be openly honest about their sexual fetishization of animals. Like they want to fuck dead animals. Like, so there comes a point in Cows where people start sticking their dicks in the dead brain holes before turning them into meat at a meat processing plant. I don't even know. Like genuinely, I'm an intellectual. I have to think about this with intellectual rigor. God damn it. I don't even know what the fuck to say about that. Southern marginalized attitudes towards culture that we don't really want to intercept or deal with, but do have serious effects and consequences. And it's almost like one of those things where when you eat a hamburger, right, you're thinking, oh yeah, I feel a little bad because I know that the animal suffered. You genuinely have no idea how fucked up it could be at what's happening at the plants. But it's not really about the plants and what's right or wrong about that. It's about, there are certain aspects of life where there's a moment where somebody is going to, I talk about this a lot with the Genki people, but there are moments where you have to choose to be that vile, and you can be lured into it, sure, but you have to intentionally choose. This is what I would like my life to amount to. I would like to become this vile. There's a moment in Cows where the main character has to decide to become that vile. Like, sees the option, sees all the alternatives, but it's like, I will choose to be this vile. That aspect of it was really, really interesting. I almost wish that it was more developed on than any other thing in the book. So repulsive that I genuinely did not like it, and I did not review it anywhere. Maybe you will like it. I think it's self-published. I can't imagine anyone on earth publishing this book. Like, that book is very bad. How the fuck does this exist. And honestly, with self-publishing and shit like that, what a miracle. Okay, so the next book, number 6, is There's Always One. It's the depressing pick. It's the one that's like a real fucking bummer. Ghosts of My Life by Mark Fisher. I don't know if you know anything about this. It's a whole rabbit hole, but basically this is a capitalist realist story. This is about the hauntology of existence, which is to say that every time something happens and something better was supposed to happen, it haunts you and then sours the remainder of your existence. So when I was looking up the books that would ruin my life and make me want to die, I read Conspiracy Against the Human Race, and they also recommended Spinal Catastrophism, which is pretty fun. Ghosts of My Life. This one bothered the shit out of me. Because it's capitalist realist, its thing is like, there are genuine consequences to a lot of the capitalism that we don't see, and a lot of them affect our lives in some sort of deep-seated weird way. Almost we can't even explain why it is that our lives are so miserable in a system that we can't do anything about. Ghosts of My Life argues, what Mark Fisher argues, is that there really is hardly any control in existence besides suicide. Like, suicide is almost one of the only autonomous decisions one can make, and usually when someone makes the suicidal decision, it's at a time of the most possible impact. So he talks about Joy Division, and he talks about explaining why Ian Curtis killed himself, and also why it was understandable, profound, and powerful. He also talks about Kurt Cobain's suicide and how it was perfectly timed, profound, and powerful. He's making a lot of arguments for how suicide is good, actually, and everyone should try it. And if you're a suicidal person and you're being presented with genuine arguments that are like, you should in fact kill yourself, and here is why, that can be a little troublesome to little old me. This is all, of course, complicated by the fact that Mark Fisher killed himself. He wrote this book encouraging people to kill themselves with very genuine arguments, and then did so at a time of the most possible impact. So he lived the truth that he was arguing for, which makes it even more fucked up and difficult to handle. Ghosts of My Life is very important. I would say that it's probably one of the more important books I've ever read in my life, but I will say that it is very difficult, very challenging, and not for the faint of heart. Like, please don't. Read it if you are strong enough. I do feel like if I read this book at 17, I would be dead. There's no joke about that. And that's, I feel really shitty saying that, but someone has to say it. I feel like if I had read Ghosts of My Life at 17, I would be dead. But unfortunately for the book, I am alive and I continue to live, having read the book at like 27 or something like that. I'm also what they call a hopeful skeptic. Despair has a really hard time of gripping me because I'm such a hopeful skeptic. Every time somebody says something edgy, mean, or dark to me, I always have a tendency to look on the bright side of things. Whenever somebody tells me like suicide is a good thing, you should try it, but isn't living fun? The opposite book to Ghosts of My Life that you should read is the Bhagavad Gita. Like, that book will kill your despair, whereas Ghosts of My Life will create some new despair for you. So book number 7 is House of Leaves. Oh my god, I feel like this is probably the most complicated book that maybe even exists in American fiction, maybe ever will exist in American fiction. It's quite something. It is very literally a labyrinthian tome about a labyrinth that exists inside someone's house. Someone's house begins to get larger on the inside than the floor plan suggests it is on the outside. It starts to gain hallways, which is very spooky. So they start to investigate these hallways, and then these hallways turn into hallways filled with doors, and then these doors turn into hallways filled with doors. This thing goes back for miles. Let's see how far back this fucking thing goes. So some people make a documentary filming themselves going into the house to see how deep they can go. And in the documentary, they all completely lose their mind and they turn on each other and begin attacking each other. And also there's a possible minotaur in the labyrinth, and also they get lost. There's a whole bunch of things that happen. These are things that are plot driven, okay? This is me telling you what is in the story. But understand that the story is written by Mark Z. Danielski, who is writing as Johnny, who is like a kind of scumbag young kid who's his life is kind of going nowhere, but he met this guy who was a writer, and this writer's name, I believe, is Zampano. I'm probably wrong. He was writing notes, transcription of this documentary called The 5.5 Minute Hallway, them walking into the labyrinth. So he was translating that. He died because he seemingly was attacked by a minotaur. And then Johnny takes up the mantle and starts going insane and thinking that he's experiencing a minotaur as well. So there are literally like 7 fucking narratives going on with different people writing different things, and each one of them is a different font, different formatting. So you're reading as several different people commenting on something objective that happened. And then at the end of the book, it gets really fucking weird because Johnny meets someone who has already read the writing that he's currently writing, talking to somebody who is reading a book he has not yet published that they have a copy of, written by him, that he has not yet finished writing. And this like breaks his brain. I could talk about House of Leaves for goddamn hours, but the point of House of Leaves is so well hidden. Good luck finding it. And there's so much lore, there's so much shit, there's so many footnotes, so many details, words going sprawling different ways that you will get confused enough to not realize that there's a fairly simple point. There are a lot of elements to our metaphysical existence that make absolutely no fucking sense, and you can absolutely obsess and spiral out of control with that obsession trying to understand them. Fairly clear and distinct, but it's a hard point to give to anybody who is that deep into the lore of House of Leaves, because House of Leaves is the most complicated and rewarding book I've probably ever read, in that the more you give to it, the more you learn from it. It's an American nightmare. Get ready for it to genuinely bother the shit out of you. If everything else on this list is like, here's a disturbing concept, here's a fucked up story, an argument for suicide, something like that, this book is an obsession. You will get obsessed with this. If you read it, you will want to read it again because you will think you missed something. And then at the end of that, you will want to read it again because you will think you missed something. And you will find yourself giving years of your life trying to understand House of Leaves. I promise you will. I did the same thing. So it's worth mentioning that this book is almost like a curse you give somebody. Home you hand somebody and you're like, hello, I would like you to be obsessed with this now. It's almost as complicated as the Bible. So the 8th book on my list is Less Than Zero. So this is the Bret Easton Ellis book that I put on my list. I told you that I was going to be putting a Bret Easton Ellis on my list. This would be the one. Less Than Zero has a film adaptation, but as far as I know, it's not that great. American Psycho's film adaptation is mostly notable because of how it reappropriates a lot of the ideas in American Psycho. Bret Easton Ellis' first book, Less Than Zero, is an honest portrayal of basically a bunch of yuppies doing drugs until they get to the point where falling into prostitution, and then they're ironically ending up in like serious abuse, bad situations. Dumb, rich white kids that finally find consequences, and they cannot handle it. The consequences are so in-depth and extreme. Less Than Zero is probably the most influential book to my writing style I ever read. Fluids and Less Than Zero have an awful lot in common, and I'm kind of surprised no one's mentioned it yet. Less Than Zero is a book that I inhaled in one breath when I was like 18, and I have never read since. I only read it the one time when I was 18, and I read it in literally 3 hours. I just blew through the whole book. You can be ironic and you can be funny about a lot of these things, but you can find yourself inches away from Less Than Zero, completely being nothing at all, only through irony, bad decisions, bad friends, and shit like that that can genuinely destroy your whole fucking life. The thing I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Crank, about losing friends to crystal meth, like that did happen. I've lost friends to crystal meth, I've lost friends to heroin, and Less Than Zero in my mind is the only book that ever gave me detailed, actual clarity on why my friends died, what their mentality was leading them into this absolute harrowing nightmare. And listen, I've been in my own little harrowing nightmares because of drugs. Definitely experienced some pretty bad shit in my life, but there is a serious difference dealing with those consequences in a very, very real, visceral way, and then just feeling like you're always getting away with whatever you want. Like American Psycho is a book about getting away with whatever you want, but the threat, potentially facing consequences as a white person who wants to murder women, the fear of that almost almost as intense as the pleasure he seems to be experiencing killing people. In Less Than Zero, they have absolutely no awareness of consequences, and then when the consequences find them, they completely destroy them. Can't say enough about Less Than Zero being a great book written by a total piece of shit. Sorry, Brett, if you're here. Okay, so the next book is the only book that I've read in the last 5 years to end up here. It's the only one, and a lot of people are probably going to be like, this is some pussy garbage. Why did you include this? But I'm including it because it got to me. The book is called Things Have Gotten Worse Since Last We Spoke. There was a TikTok explosion about this book where people were just like talking about it. It started out as just like an indie title, and then people were like, holy shit, this is really gross, this is really disturbing. A lot of people were talking about how not only is it disturbing, but it's also like gay, and it also talks about the gay experience. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of books on my list that are very gay. This is my lesbian pick. It's the one for the girls out there. If you like the fucked up books and you're a girl, congratulations. They do in fact make books for you. They make a lot of books for you. I made a book for you. Things Have Gotten Worse Since Last We Spoke was a very short read. I read it in about an hour. Things getting out of hand in an online relationship, then things turning into really weirdly controlling and kind of unsafe and dangerous, then turning into really slimy. Option A, B, and C. I mentioned this on the top 10 video. It's like option A is everything that anyone in the audience would think of. Option B, half the audience, and option C, no one but you. Things Have Gotten Worse Since Last We Spoke is a great example of, at the very end of it, it gives you an option C, and you're like, no, that's a new gross thing that I didn't know I hated. And by the end of it, you deeply, deeply hate how slimy and disgusting this fucking book is. I gave this book out to like 5 people immediately after I read it, and I was like, please read this. It's disgusting. I like it. Things Have Gotten Worse Since Last We Spoke. Definitely a decent number 9 pick because, oh boy, fucking hated it. And the last pick is Junji Ito's adaptation of No Longer Human. I think that No Longer Human is a fucking terrifying tale about average life being desired, having expectations fall on you, and having life completely get away with, from you because you're only ever concerned about avoiding expectations and avoiding potential damage. The Junji Ito adaptation visually depicts a lot of the deeply, deeply awful things in No Longer Human and makes them almost inappropriately disgusting to the soul. Rapes that happen to a guy. And No Longer Human kind of is Junji Ito's genuine attempt to be like, yes, I'm going to portray violent sexuality, which is not something that Junji Ito usually does. He has a tendency to be kind of a fantasy guy. He talks about the real world, but he does it through metaphor a lot. In No Longer Human, he completely drops his metaphor and he just paints what's true in such a way that it's like viscerally upsetting, and it also reflects my life in ways that I genuinely don't want. Someone can have a series of people just begin to fall in love with them, and then because you don't know how to deal with these people and their expectations, you slowly kind of just start to go insane while they go insane, and neither of you can do anything about it until eventually you accept their love because you're worried that they're going to end their own life or do something drastic to you or someone you love because they love you and you don't love them back. So eventually you start like giving yourself to that relationship. You just give yourself back to it, and when you give yourself back to it, you become no longer human. The remainder of your life is pretty much completely without your autonomy or control, so what does it even matter? No Longer Human. Really upsetting stuff about the general vibe of life. I think a lot of these books have a tendency to be about longevity. It's not just about things being disturbing right now. It's not about somebody grabbing somebody and stabbing them or something like that. It's about life getting bad over time. You can make decisions right now that you think are great decisions, but at the end of 10 years, they're going to turn out to be the biggest nightmares for you. I started my YouTube channel almost a decade ago. When I started my YouTube channel, I thought it was going to be fun and exciting, and I never thought that it would turn into a job, a difficult job, and I also never thought that it would turn into me basically being openly queer and telling people the truth about life and death and also being queer. Did not imagine that I was ever going to see things that were going to give me trauma based on my need to do it for my job. I never thought that these things would happen because I was being foolish. So I have like a whole plethora of problems, and a lot of these developed in the last 10 years, and they developed as consequences from things I just was completely unaware of 10 years ago. I'm almost constantly kicking myself for not making the necessary adjustments I needed to 10 years ago to be happy now. That is the ultimate like hauntology nightmare. The idea that our our past and our past failures will always follow us, as well as our past successes. If Mark Fisher is right about one thing, if anything whatsoever, he's right about a lot of things, to be honest with you, the past perspectives haunting our future and the idea that we could be living a better life if we had actually done something right for ourselves a long time ago does eat away at you more and more and more as time goes on, and it does make life easier to fall into despair and more difficult to find hope. But that said, hope is also out there, and just because these are this is a list of fucked up books that exist, fucked up ideas, generally negative approaches to existence and reality, does not mean that there aren't things out there that are enriching and fabulous. I mentioned the Bhagavad Gita earlier. Everyone should read that. There are things that it mentions that will genuinely change the way that you look at yourself, and it will prevent you from feeling despair. The Tao Te Ching is like that. So many books that are genuinely about building yourself up and finding yourself not being so afraid of the things that exist in the world. So, there's this association a lot of times that people that write shit like this have really bad brains, bad ideas, maybe they're dangerous, and perhaps some of that is true. I can say that I'm a fairly wholesome person. I have a tendency to read things that are enriching and enlightening in equal proportion to the disturbing and fucked up books that I've read, but I've also written a fucked up book. I also tried to write it with at least somewhat a perspective so that at the end of it, it ended up being more about hope than despair. Hope and despair, I feel like, are constantly the things at play. And I don't want people to despair, but I do want people to know about these things being out there. More than anything, I think when we talk about these things, we confront them, and they no longer have any sort of power over us. So I want to thank you all deeply for continuing to come to my YouTube channel, continuing to listen to my thoughts, hang out with me, look at my face, and not run screaming from the room. I am still Mayleets. Have I always been? You can find all of my links in the description below. Please consider leaving this video a like. Feed on likes. I'm hungry, and I'm always hungry. So if you don't feed them to me, I'll die. And I know you don't want me to die. You want me to keep making beautiful videos. So give me those likes, give me those subscriptions, and go over to patreon.com/NickSpheres and, help support the channel. I'm trying to make more content. Also, huge shout out to my book Fluids. You should pick it up. It's gross. It's disturbing. I sign literally every copy of them. About to order a whole bunch more after another round of pre-orders. I just shipped out like 400 of these. Almost 1,000 people have read this now. Wild. Pick this up and give it a read if you are interested in lesbians, gross shit, vomit, murder. It's all in there. I'm actually very proud that I've written a book that I feel like at least somewhat contends with some of these disturbing books. As far as the awful shit goes, I feel like I kind of get there occasionally in the book. So we'll see, but I'm curious as to what people think about it, just in general. Either way, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for watching my videos and listening to my music and reading my book and doing all the things that you do. I sure love you. I hope that I see you really soon. And you know what? I probably will. Bye!